Now I kind of want to turn to what we saw in Uvalde. Jerry, of course, you helped write the handgun law in Texas, but that wouldn't have applied to this situation, of course. The under 21 would have. He purchased a firearm when he turned 18, but I'm just curious if you see your law as something that you might wanted to revisit now.
Well, I don't think the concealed handgun law, as it was when I passed it, now it's a right to carry law, and of course now there's constitutional carry. I don't think that has anything to do with what happened in Uvalde. I mean, there's what does have something with that. We have someone who was, people say, well, it's not all mental illness, but I don't know, something was wrong with this guy. And so how do you find people like that? How do you identify those who are prone to commit violence and see that they have no access to a firearm, and do that in a constitutional, respectful of due process manner that also would provide a criminal penalty for somebody who swore a false complaint that somebody was a threat? So there's lots of things on the table, and I'm convinced that many of them would make no difference, but some would. Safe storage, PSAs. I mean, the number of kids killed by finding a firearm at home and accidental discharge die. I just wish all the money that both sides use to lobby on this issue would go to PSAs about tragic child deaths at home from unsecured firearms.
I want to turn now more to the solutions, and we're going to talk a lot more about the mental health one. But in the days and weeks following what we saw in Uvalde, Governor Greg Abbott has started a lot of initiatives directing different agencies and commissions to kind of check their protocols and making sure they're doing all these things. I'll direct this question to you, State Representative Howard. Do you think that these directives have been enough in response?
Well, first off, I would suggest that we really do need to have a special session. The fact is that the way that we are set up here to work in the state of Texas, we are a part-time legislature that only meets for 5 months every other year. And when these major events happen, the only way that we can address them legislatively is if the governor calls us into special session. And I think there's folks on both sides of the aisle who have asked for that to happen. And at this point in time, there's no indication that that will. That being said, I think that we obviously need to have a lot of discussion and debate about what we can do that will move us forward in protecting Texans and those obviously who visit our state. When we're looking at what kind of policies can have some kind of bipartisan common ground support, I think we are hearing that people would support universal background checks. Right now, my understanding, and I'm sure that some might know more than I know about this, but my understanding is that those background checks are only with the licensed dealers like Mike Cargill here, that the private sales, the gun show sales, those background checks are not in place. We also know that though we require you to be 21 to get a gun here in Texas, in terms of the long guns, which the semi-automatics fall under. Jerry, you can correct me.
You had it backwards. 21 for a handgun.
Handgun, right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not using the right terminology perhaps, but 21 for a handgun, 18 though for the long gun. And long guns, when I was a kid here in Austin, Texas, the guys at my school had their hunting rifles in the back of their trucks, mounted there. I get that. That's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about semi-automatic weapons that, as we heard in Uvalde, unfortunately, decapitated children, decimated these bodies. And we need to talk about the fact that the Violence Project shows that 80% of school shootings are done by those that are 18 and younger. The mean age is 16. We need to be talking about what can we do to at least make it more difficult for those young people to get access to these deadly weapons.
Jerry, I'll kind of go back to you as a former lawmaker. Do you think that these directives that the governor is doing right now are enough to kind of reassure a lot of people who are concerned after Uvalde, who are concerned after things we've seen in the last year on 6th Street? And, obviously they can't legislate when they're not in session, but do you think these directives are enough accountability measures going forward?
I don't really think so. And as to the special session, I don't disagree a special session is called for. I just don't know that we can do that right now. 150 days away from an election, there's really no consensus. My fear is with a special session, we just have people screaming at each other. Nobody's going to take I don't think, for a while. But there may be a consensus building. I mean, this federal bill, which, doesn't, I think sounds, I haven't read it. I don't know what the details are. You mentioned gun shows. I want to say one thing. Gun show sales are primarily all background checked, but there are private sellers at gun shows. But I would say 80% of the firearms sold at gun shows are background checked, but there are some that are not. And that is can we improve the background check system? I'll tell you one thing. Right now, there's a 3-day period that ATF has to respond and either deny or approve the purchase. If they haven't found anything in 3 days, it's an automatic approval. That would have, had that period been extended, say to some other 7 days, the shooter in Charleston, South Carolina, who killed all those folks in that church, there are things we can do that are really not controversial that would help, and maybe we ought to start there and then go to the controversial things.
Before we go to our break, I want to kind of